Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to part 3 of Unit 6, Building the Republic. I'm Miss Jennifer Blank, and I'm going to be leading you through this journey. So these are the big ideas we've been talking about. In the previous 2 presentations, we talked about all these guys, and then right now we're going to talk about reform movements and religious revivals. So these things are very, very important, so I want you to pay close attention. So let's start out with, well, reform movements and religious revivals. How about that? So reform. Reform equals a change that will improve things, all right? You want to make significant changes, and that's going to result in improvement. All right, so what are the main impulses that we're dealing with here? Well, people had distinct faith in human nature. We believe in the goodness of the individual at this time. We have a desire for order and control. There was a desire to remake society, and there were also religious and moral impulses. So the key movements that were occurring during this period are listed over here to your right. Okay, we have Romanticism, Transcendentalists, Utopian societies, the Second Great Awakening, the Temperance Crusade, Feminism, and Abolitionism. So we are in this presentation, I'm going to talk about 4 key ideas. We're going to talk about Transcendentalism, the Abolitionist movement, early women's suffrage, and the Second Great Awakening. So let's start talking about Transcendentalism. Transcendentalism basically means an ideal spiritual state that transcends to rise above or go beyond the physical and empirical world. So it's very, very much about spirituality and being connected to this other world that you can't really see. So you can see how this relates to religion, but it's not directly related to religion. It's beyond a specific religious belief. There was a collection of eclectic, a big mix of interesting and unique ideas, including philosophy, literature, religion and social reform, and American culture. So Transcendentalism really encompassed all 4 of those things. It was very individualistic. It's important that it sounds similar to religion, but it was not a religion. It was a philosophy or a spiritual state of being, a way of looking at the world, but not a religious faith as we would understand it. And it emphasized intuition over the rational or the physical. This, ladies and gentlemen, is in direct contradiction to the Enlightenment. So let's talk about the historical progression of Transcendentalism, of this idea. Well, it starts in Europe, and the European movement was called Romanticism. It was in the 18th and 19th centuries. It was a direct response to the Enlightenment movement of the 18th century. Okay, now if we remember, the Enlightenment was all based on human reason, and humans are great, and let's examine the physical world and focus on what we can do in the here and now. Well, as you can see, Romanticism or Transcendentalism was the complete opposite of that. It was all about intuition and feeling and spirituality, and that was absolutely the opposite of the Enlightenment. Now, key thinkers of the Enlightenment were the following folks. So these should sound familiar. Immanuel Kant, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Francois-Marie Arouet, and Montesquieu. Okay, and actually Voltaire. Voltaire was the guy, that was his name right there, and Montesquieu. These are the key thinkers and authors from the Enlightenment. Many of them should sound familiar to you. All right, so in the United States, we developed this American version of Romanticism, and like I said, that's called Transcendentalism. I know, it's kind of a tongue twister. But the key thinkers, American thinkers, were Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and yes, we have a female, which is exciting, Margaret Fuller. All right, these were the 3, I mean, there were others, but these are 3 key thinkers of Transcendentalism. In the early 19th century, folks like these key thinkers worked with religious social reformers to improve education and living conditions. They also worked to help minorities gain some political rights that they didn't have at that point. Manifest Destiny, ironically enough, was very, very closely related to the Transcendentalist movement. The idea that the United States was God's chosen country and that its mission was to expand westward and spread democratic ideals. That's Manifest Destiny. Later on in the 19th century, we see a split with the Transcendentalists and religious movements. They completely go opposite directions. And you have the development of very independent American art forms. So this is key for art historians. If you're interested in fine art, visual art, this is going to be very, very key for you to pay attention to. Now let's move on to the abolitionist movement. This was in the 1820s. It was the start of this movement to free African Americans from slavery. One particular key leader was this white radical named William Lloyd Garrison. And when I say radical, I mean radical. And we're going to talk about him on the next slide. Abolitionists called for immediate emancipation or the freeing of all slaves. Right now, with all deliberate speed, make it happen. That's what the abolitionist movement's goal was. Now, William Lloyd Garrison, these were some of his key arguments. He said slavery undermined Republican values. The immediate emancipation should occur with absolutely no compensation because you shouldn't have been doing this in the first place. You are putting human beings in servitude. These are human beings. You do not deserve to be paid for allowing human beings to be fully human, to be considered fully human. It's an insult to ask for compensation, according to William Lloyd Garrison. Slavery is a moral issue. It's not an economic one. So he said, you can take your economic arguments and you can go pound sand. He said that this is a bigger issue than you and your money. These are human beings and need to be treated as such. And this was his argument, or his key arguments. Harriet Tubman was a little less, did not advocate violence. William Lloyd Garrison was like, if I got to take it by force, that's fine. I'll just go take it. You know, we got to kill people, we got to kill people. And that he was okay with that. Harriet Tubman was underground. She ran the Underground Railroad. There were homes, barns, woods, and trails that were constructed and used to ferry slaves from the Deep South through freedom, up through the north to get to freedom. She went on 19 missions herself. She is personally responsible for freeing over 300 people. She was the spearheader of the Underground Railroad, and the reason why so many slaves were able to get to freedom was because of this woman. She is incredibly, amazingly important. I cannot possibly overemphasize her importance to the abolitionist movement. She was an amazing, amazing woman. So now let's move into women reform and the cult of domesticity. So we're going to start talking about the women's suffrage movement. Now, it starts around this time period, around the early 1800s, but it kicks into high gear in the 1840s. So I want you to keep these ideas in mind, because when I get into the next unit, we are going to revisit this, because it's going to really kick into high gear. Women, it's important to note, were active in all reform movements. All of them. So this period in history is absolutely amazing and fascinating and rich with active women who were involved in all of these movements. So this is, if you're a fan of women's history, this is going to be a really, really awesome unit for you, because there's such depth to what women were participating in. So it's really exciting. The 1800s allowed women the opportunity to become educated. Okay, as we talked about in the previous presentation, this idea that women could choose their own partners and that they had at least a little bit more agency in their lives. At this point developed the separate spheres concept, this cult of domesticity. Women, they controlled the home. Okay, so now, as opposed to the male controlling everything, women have complete domination of the home, because her role was to civilize the husband and family. She was responsible for educating her young sons into becoming prosperous and good men of society. She had to raise her daughters to take over their role in shaping and civilizing her future husband and family. So women, even though it was just in the home, the fact that they had some dominant area that was theirs to control is a very, very important distinct change. That's very key. But even though they were developing some additional agency, this didn't mean everything was hunky-dory, because women could not vote. They were not considered an adult in legal matters. If they were single, they could own their own property, although that was very difficult. Married, she had nothing, no control over her property or the legal status of her children. She could not initiate divorce. She could not make wills, sign a contract, or bring a suit in court without husband's permission. So women still did not have all the rights they should have. We still have quite far to go. But at least we're making a step in the right direction at this point in history. Now, Second Great Awakening. We've learned about the First Great Awakening, so I want you to remember that. That was the 1730s and 40s. And not too long after, boom, we got us another one. So this focused on personal conversion and individual perfection. They wanted to turn religious energies and turn it into a social reform. You want to cure social ills, and this is where the temperance movement grew out of. The temperance movement was this movement against alcohol. They wanted to get rid of all alcohol in the country, and the temperance movement grew into the prohibition movement, which you will learn about when you get into the 1920s. So my students, I want you to check out this link down here and take notes. This is going to give you a lot of nice details on the Second Great Awakening. But again, personal conversion, individual perfection. We are going to cure society of all its problems. We want to take our religious excitement and energy, and we want to use it to fix all the problems in society. That's what this is all about. So let me give you a nice little chart here on the Second Great Awakening. So a lot of reform movements grew out of the Second Great Awakening. You have a spiritual reform from within. This is religious revivalism. And then from that, you have social reforms, and people are redefining the idea of what is equality. So you have the temperance movement. You have asylum and penal reform. You have abolitionism, women's rights, and education. So we've got a lot of key movements that are happening here. This all stems from the Second Great Awakening, okay? Which stems from Transcendentalism, this idea of having a spiritual connection. Because at first, all these groups were connected. And then, later on, the Transcendentalists break off and the Second Great Awakening religious folks break off. But those movements were very, very important in spearheading and spurring on these other movements to occur. So it's very important. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about some politics a little bit. So there were 4 candidates of the old Republican Party in 1824. Okay, we have John Quincy Adams, who he is related to John Adams, former president. Henry Clay, who was a very, very important congressman. Andrew Jackson, of course, the hero from the Battle of New Orleans. And this guy named William Crawford, who doesn't matter so much because he got sick and then he was like, okay, I'm out. Peace, so he's done. Let's take a closer look at the candidates. Adams, as I said, he's related to John. He's the son of John Adams. He had served as Secretary of State and helped end the War of 1812. He was very experienced. He was intelligent, of high moral character, but he was uncomfortable campaigning among common people because he wasn't. I mean, John Adams was his father, for God's sake, and this was not a common guy, right? So Clay was a very skillful negotiator that worked out several important compromises, namely the Missouri Compromise. Remember Henry Clay, very important. Also a candidate in the election of 1824. Jackson, Andrew Jackson. We know all about this guy, right? Well, we're going to learn more about him. He was made famous by a series of military victories during the War of 1812, primarily the Battle of New Orleans. He was a landowner and slave owner, but he did grow up poor, and he was seen as the man of the people, even though that couldn't be further from the truth. So, the election of 1824 was contentious, and this thing called the corrupt bargain came out of it. So there was no clear winner from the election of 1824 at first. Jackson had won the popular vote, but he did not win a majority of electoral votes. Gee, let me think. Does that sound familiar? Oh yeah, the election of 2000. The more things change, the more they stay the same, folks. So the House of Representatives had to choose the winner. Because he finished third, Clay was out, and he used his very impressive negotiating skills to get members to vote for Adams. As a thank you, Adams said, hey, Clay, listen, I appreciate your help there. I'm going to make you Secretary of State. So Jackson is ticked off, to say the least, and he claims corruption, and he said what was done, but unfortunately, that's what the Constitution says has to happen. That, according to the Constitution, that's how it's supposed to be done. So he claimed it was corrupt, but in fact, it was a constitutional decision. So, the election of Andrew Jackson. Jackson was known as Old Hickory. He was a hero of the common man, but he won election in 1828. Why do you think that is? Why, I wonder. Oh, because he expanded, the right to vote was expanded to more citizens. So because he was a hero of the common man, he was able to garner more support. In the 1824 election, John Quincy Adams was declared the winner, just like we learned on the previous slide. Only 350,000 white males voted. In 1828, Jackson won, but over 1 million white males voted. That changes the game significantly. So, John Quincy, unfortunately, was an unpopular president. He was all about economic growth, and he wanted to use the federal government to make internal improvements like roads. He wanted to expand what we had already been doing under President Monroe. He encouraged projects that promoted the arts and sciences as well. So he was all about a national university and observatory. So that's pretty cool, right? We like him in education. But most Americans said, that's junk, man. We don't want you to spend money on those programs because the government's going to have too much power. That is not cool. We're not a fan of that. So we have a bitter campaign that follows. The election of 28 is Adams versus Jackson again. Campaign was not a focus on issues. It was a focus on personality. Jackson said that Adams was stuck up because he was a member of the upper class, and supporters of Adams said Jackson was a military chieftain and he'd be a dictator like Napoleon. They were kind of correct. We'll learn about that in the next unit.
But who won? I can't take the suspense.
Andrew Jackson wins, but we will talk about his presidency in Unit 7. This is the end of Unit 6. I hope you learn what you need to, and I will see you in the next video.